Hello, everyone. Welcome to Apropos. If you're joining us live in the Discord, thank you so much for being here. If you're watching us later somewhere else, hello as well. There's a Discord link in the description of this video. So yes,
Can we just say, Eric, that there's a chat called Live Show Chat, the channel Live Show Chat, and that's what
yes,
we're watching for any
yes.
comments as we go along.
If you're live watching, go to the live show chat. You can be in both the channel watching us on the video and have the chat open as well, so that's what we're going to be watching. If you have a question or a comment, just drop it right in there. And we're just going to get started. I dropped the show notes link in there, so if you're live, you can see what we're talking about. What are we talking about? There was a cool extension to the Clojure compiler, which is just a patch in Jira right now, and it does automatic conversion of a function into the functional interfaces that came with Java 1.8, which is like the Lambda stuff.
Is that the SAM stuff, or is that different?
It's most. Go ahead.
I
don't know what the
SAM
acronym
stood
is.
for. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if there's an interface with a single method, a Lambda will compile to that type. Yeah, so that lets you use a Lambda expression in Java. This is Java, right?
Okay.
It lets you use a Lambda expression wherever it needs a single method interface. So instead of like an anonymous class, how you would do it before, now you can write this little Lambda thing. And of course that we couldn't really do that easily. We would have to, in Clojure, do like a reify on the interface and then implement that method. And this way you can just drop a fun in there. And it's a compiler extension. So what it does is it checks the type at compiled time of your Clojure code, and I guess it does something similar to what the reify does anyway.
So what's a compiler extension? Is that a new concept, or have they been around for a
No,
while?
he forked Clojure and wrote a new case in the compiler.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not a compiler extension, it's just
right.
a PR, basically.
Fair enough.
Yes.
It's an extension to the compiler.
It's a patch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now,
yeah.
it should be mentioned that this issue on Jira has no comments from anyone in the Clojure core. No sign that they've even seen it, but it kind of, I don't know, made its way around on Twitter and stuff. People have been talking about it.
Some excitement is brewing right now.
And this is really like a way of making it easier to use Lambda streams and stuff, Java 8 streams. I don't know if there's much more than that. It's just
one of the things I was thinking of was, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but if you're a Java programmer and you write a library that exploits these capabilities in Java 1.8, how does it affect the interoperability with Clojure? So in other words, can we consume that library in Clojure? But we probably can, but I guess we have to do some tricks, like you were saying about reify or whatever, that makes it more tricky to do that. Whereas you would expect, the ergonomics of that consumption should be improved with this patch.
Did you just say reify?
Reify, man. It's like my name, Ray.
Oh, okay, reify. Okay,
That's
now I'll never forget that.
Uh-oh. That's a new thing. We gotta drop that in the chat.
I won't look at that function the same way ever again. Clojure core reify.
I own the domain, by the way.
Yeah, so I'm sure that there are some weird cases where it's like really inconvenient to have to write these reifys all the time. So have y'all ever used Swing?
Oh my God! Yes.
I think so.
Well,
like 20 years
so
ago.
Swing, Yeah, yeah. It's a GUI library for Java, right? And it had all these types that were the handlers for like button click. So there was a type called button click handler, and there was a type called uh, um, window close handler, and they all had a single method, and they all had different names. And so what you had to do as a programmer was like memorize like this huge list of names of the handler types and the method names. Now, of course, your IDE might help you like figure out what you need to do, but you had to actually um, write them out as anonymous classes, right? So you had to do like new and then give the name and then instantiate it. Um, and then there was a thing called enclosure. What was it called? It was the swing wrapper. And basically, they figured out like, let's not use all these different types that basically all do the same thing, which is they take a particular event and, do something with it. Um, and let's just allow people to drop in a function of one argument. And we're going to turn all the events into just a map, and so you don't have to like know the type. They all had standard, you know, standard fields and stuff, and it was so much nicer that you didn't have to remember all these things. Similar to how in JavaScript you just drop a function in an add event listener, and it's like now you don't have to know the type. So I'm wondering if like Java Streams doesn't need just like a little magic like that. I'm skeptical of a compiler patch that it will be accepted. It's a new code path through the compiler, and there have been times when those have happened before. They've been dropped into Jira and rejected, and I'm also skeptical that we need it. So those are my two skeptical things.
Yeah, I mean, if you
Why
stick
are you
with
skeptical of?
What'd you say, Ray?
If it makes it difficult to consume Java and interoperability is bad, why wouldn't it be a good thing to have?
I think it would be good to have if we could find a like simple, elegant solution to it. I'm not sure that this is it. I mean, there's other things in the Java language that are like way more complicated than it seems, like the var args on methods, where you have to like instantiate a typed array, just to like even an empty one, just to pass it to some method. Alex Miller has talked about like, oh, it's way more complicated than you think. Like you can't just detect it somehow and construct these things. It'd be nice if they worked just like var args in closure functions. So I don't know. I'm just kind of skeptical that solution is gonna hit all the cases we're interested in. It's another one of those things where Java has been extended in the language in the compiler and not on the back end, like not in the JVM, where it compiles to something else that's not that we like the language has like all the type erasure stuff and the generics, all that stuff gets compiled away, and so we've been able to get by without having our own generics, and I think that in this case, like we're starting to see these conflicts where like that compiles to something totally different from what it looks like, and I don't know, our interop is strained because of that. So I think it's a complex issue, I guess. That's my answer.
You can always use Ray.
Do y'all like it? You can always use arrayify. Then you have to know the name of the type and the method.
Ouch. Well,
Yeah.
I guess I'm not doing much interop these days with that kind of stuff, so it doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, Java interop is always relatively straightforward. Like you say, there's a one-pager on the Clojure website, on the Clojure.org website, which I always go to if I find myself stuck on something.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interrupting with something like Scala that is really painful.
Ooh.
So
Yeah.
we don't need to worry about it.
And I've looked at the stream stuff, and it is not as nice as just doing a Clojure map over an array list, a Java array list. We have it really nice. For one thing, like you have to, you can only call them once, right? They're not constructed and like lazy, so you can't do like you can't have it like halfway done and then use it again somewhere else. Like it doesn't work that way. If that that probably doesn't make sense what I just said, but like how in Clojure you would say like, okay, do a map, do another map, do a filter, and now I have it. I have a list that has all the stuff at that point, and now I can do two different things with that. I can do a map and I can reduce it on that same value, and they both work. Yeah. Well, in Java, the streams you can only use it once, and it's weird to me to think that is. I'm sure it's better than what you had to do before with for loops, but
I didn't notice. Yeah,
it takes a lot of getting used to.
Why is it that you can only do it once? I think I missed that part.
If you take the value of like after doing the map filter, if you save that to a variable, you can of course do like reduce on it, right? Okay. But if you do another, and then after that, if you do a filter on it, it'll throw an exception. It'll say like, oh, you've already used this.
There's some state management going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's different, you just have to. I don't know.
Rules, yeah.
you have to turn it into a list. There's a method that will like instantiate it as an actual list, instead of just being like this unfinished stream. You can actually say like to list, and then you can take that list and do two new streams on it, one for the reduce and another one for the next filter. So it's not as convenient. And array list already is an iterable, so you can do map on it with no problem in a Clojure map. I mean, so for us, it's like, what's that?
Yeah, if we're gonna be list processing, when I use the list processing language.
Yeah.
You didn't
and
just go there.
And there's all sorts of debate. I mean,
yes.
There's all sorts of like questions in the Java community. I don't know why I know this stuff.
Yeah, what's up?
I don't know. I don't know why I know this. I was playing with it, like trying to figure out like, is this useful
what is wrong
or not?
with you, man?
There's all sorts of questions about like, what are the best practices for this? Like, how does this actually help? Like I have all these classes, and now I have to do stuff with data transformation pipelines. Like, I don't know how this fits in. And, I think that there's just a lot of unknowns in the Java world about how useful these are.
The language is getting more complex too, right? I mean, when I stopped learning Java, it had just gotten generics, and it was still relatively simple back then. But it's, I remember C++ being very complex, and you use a subset of it and try to keep your sanity with that subset. Maybe for Java, it's like, man, these new things. But I guess
Yeah,
languages
but as you
evolve,
go
right?
deeper
Yeah.
into the mythos, you
Mhm.
just can't keep your sanity. It draws you
It's
in.
impossible. Yeah.
I like not having to care about what a contravariant and a covariant is.
I agree. Yeah.
Is a bag of oranges a bag of fruit?
God, that's gonna break my brain.
Because a bag of fruit can contain apples, and this one can only contain oranges. Oh goodness. That brings back my college days.
Yeah.
Well, topologically, it's all a donut, so.
I thought I thought we lived in a 4-dimensional time cube. Okay, let's move on. Brought up the time cube. There have been 2 ClojureScript releases in 2021. I don't think we've talked about either of these.
Yeah, I don't recall.
If
us
only we
talking
knew
about it.
somebody who knew anything about them. Yeah.
I know.
Okay, let's go through them.
So
Let's
there's
talk about that.
there's one in April
Mhm.
about the new features is that there's a way of getting a sub library out of a JavaScript library, like
Yeah, evidently,
if it
evidently
exports
it's
a
common
map.
evidently it's common to have like a top-level object where a property itself could be thought of as namespace or whatever. So
As a
there's
whole
effective-
new namespace, yeah.
that property has a whole bunch of functions on it, and ClojureScript has this new kind of like $ syntax that lets you get at that and effectively treat it as a first-class thing. You can require it by using this funky $. So that's evidently
Because
useful for
that's
some
always
people.
been a bit weird for me with JavaScript, because you didn't quite know what was in that package. So now there's a bit more, and you can kind of like go into it a bit more, because you just assumed it was a sort of object in the past, didn't you?
So what are you
Right.
guys
So
gonna-
this is this just a convenience? Because you could always, like, in theory, just dot and get the next
get
thing.
at the things at runtime. Yeah, like near the top of your namespace, you could kind of set things up for yourself, and or at runtime at any point, you could get at things. Yeah. So yeah, I would say this is probably you could categorize it as just a convenience, syntactic kind of almost sugar to let you get at this stuff, and it also has a way to get at the default export, whatever that's called in JavaScript. So I don't have much experience with using
the
this feature, but
default.
evidently it's it helps you clean up your code a little bit.
Yeah, it says that it's only for the top level properties, and then anything that's nested under that, you're still using the dots the old way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Isn't it a more like, let's say, a more kind of honest version of interoperability, because it's it's trying to say, yes,
Expressive.
libraries are exposed this way, so we're gonna give you the facilities to consume it in the way that JavaScript people expose it idiomatically. Which I think looks like a good improvement. I mean, you could argue it's just a convenience, but it seems like it's an improvement in the sort of directness between the two languages.
Yeah.
I mean, convenience. Yeah. Well, convenience is. I don't know. Would we say that convenience is synonymous with improvement?
Sure.
Yeah, and it
That's a question. I don't. Yeah.
I think if you've watched Rich Hickey's talks, then absolutely not.
Oh.
yeah, I wonder about this. Like, does this help something in the compiler or in the Clojure with an S compiler, like, do a better job of like tree shaking and knowing what you're not using?
Yeah, to me, improvement is a performance improvement. Like, I would want to actually see this go faster. But I don't like syntactic sugar generally. I don't like looking at funny symbols.
It's just another
that's
symbol
just-
to learn.
Well, and
So
that's
Mia, you give it a thumb down, yeah,
I don't know,
or you're kind
because
of like lukewarm on it. Yeah.
yeah, I haven't worked in ClojureScript in a long time, so I'm about to start working on it. So I imagine that I will have opinions soon. The last sock in the live chat says, Shadow has supported the JavaScript object as namespace for a while. I recall it being annoying in practice because you're juggling several ways to do the same thing. Which
Yeah.
I could see that,
Yeah.
especially if you're working on a code base that has old stuff and new stuff, and the older code base isn't using the syntactic sugar and the newer code base is.
Right.
But if it's a performance, if there's like an improvement with the compiler itself, then like that's an improvement. I would like to see that.
Right. Does this actually improve interop in some way? Um, yeah, I'm curious. I'm also curious because I have used Shadow kind of exclusively recently, and I'm unaware of how far along the regular like CLJS main stuff is with doing NPM um, libraries. Because last time I used it, it didn't work at all. Or it did work, but there was like, here's 20 steps you have to do for every library. And so it just didn't make sense to do it. So I'm wondering, Mike, do you know
I do
how
not
far
use
along
npm
this
libraries
is?
myself, so I can't speak on this subject. Unfortunately, I'd run away from them whenever I can.
Because
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly,
brought this
I
up.
do. Sometimes you have to. You're like, God, I got to use this library because it's the only way to get it done. And then it's always like this goat rope for about half a day, and then you figure out how to use it or connect to it, and then you're like, oh, thank God that's over with. Move on.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would rather
So
fight
so so
1,000
if
battles.
yeah, if you embrace it fully and you're like living in that system and consuming libraries left and right, then maybe this stuff becomes important to you. And I think there's a lot of people that's fair to say about.
But
They're
does
used
it?
to that.
I mean, does it work? I don't know. Like,
Oh,
does it
does
work now? Like, can you just do like npm install, some library, and now in your closure script file, you do a require, and you have it, and then it works
Oh.
in all the compilation optimization.
I think it's still
like
I think it's very easy to find an npm library that deviates from something and it causes things to break or derail. So, like you can say, yeah, it works for the vanilla ones or whatever. Yeah, but it's always easy to find something weird, I think.
Yeah.
Just the words npm install have made me like they brought up fear. I just realized I'll be working with JavaScript again, and now I feel this fear I haven't felt in so long.
Yeah, I think that we have to be careful because ClojureScript, I mean, for a long time, I feel was ahead in terms of developer experience, availability of libraries, and just use not just libraries, but like the language was just really far ahead. Especially if you use something like Core Async. However, I think that JavaScript itself, the language, has improved a lot, and people are living in this weird world nowadays. I dip into the JavaScript world.
What's wrong
Like
with you, man?
everybody is running a different. Was that?
Oh, I said, what's wrong with you, man? Like you dip into the Java world and you dip into the JavaScript world. What is going on with you, man? It's too much.
Why?
Too much cayenne pepper down there in New Orleans.
We left the old country so you could have a better life.
I think so we have to be careful because just from sheer size of the community and the amount of like if statements that people can write per minute or how they can catch up and surpass where we were at, and I think it could have happened already, like with npm. It is changing so fast. Stuff that I did a year ago is now like way easier to do. So like I was doing some markdown stuff in JavaScript I had to search around and find Markdown. Now there's this whole Markdown parsing framework thing with plugins and stuff, and it's just like it's amazing how like they have every kind of Markdown with every kind of possible thing you want to do in Markdown,
Yeah.
and React is getting better by itself, like just vanilla React. The hooks are way better than what we've got in Reagent. And I think,
Reagent 1.0 supports hooks now.
what's that?
Reagent 1.0 supports hooks.
Oh, that's great. That's good. I'm
I was
actually
told that
experimenting.
I'll attribute that to DJ Blue.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
Chris Badada. Yeah, he told me that recently, and yeah, I didn't know it either because we'd had that discussion here a while ago. But in
Yeah.
fact, it's all there now.
And I mean hooks are great, but there's like a whole ecosystem of React compatible tooling and stuff that we can't hook into really. And I don't know, I think it might be time. Look, I'm just saying it like this. It might be time to re-look at how we wrap React so that we're more compatible with this ecosystem.
Well, they're doing it. I think that's my point.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's cool. I think the model that Reagent has is right. Like state outside of the components and stuff like that, and just re-render the things that needed to change. And I think that the React world is doing it wrong still. They want the state in the component tree for some reason. But the fact that like there's all these tools, I don't remember what it's called. Ray, I think you mentioned it. It's like this tool for like building components and
Like Storybook.
Storybook, yes. Like if we could like have access to that, I think that kind of thing is what I'm talking about. Like they don't
We
have
do
the
have
same.
access to that. Yeah.
Was that?
And so
We can have access to that.
yeah,
I mean,
what were the
we've
barriers?
done that at Vouch. I know.
Using
David has done that.
Reagent?
Why
Yeah.
couldn't you?
What you do is you just expose the reagent. You just expose the Storybook stuff as components, and then you can just consume those components.
Ah, I see. Okay. Okay.
So you can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I think
But,
that
I think there needs to be more demonstrations of how that works. That's for sure. Because
yeah,
you're right.
yeah. And it could be that we just need to figure out like those edge cases and stuff. But yeah, I think we've talked about this before, that Clojure, like its main advantage is being able to plop into an ecosystem in a runtime and take advantage of what's there. And because ClojureScript was so far ahead, I at least for myself, I stopped looking at what JavaScript was giving me because it was not as good as what ClojureScript gave me. But nowadays, I think there's so many solutions out there on NPM, and the language itself has so much built in that we can't tap into. I'm like even stuff like async await and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's my little rant.
Well, there is the other aspect of the JavaScript ecosystem that a lot of people are starting to use TypeScript for making libraries, and then exposing those libraries via JavaScript. But actually, the real source is TypeScript, not JavaScript.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't know what the story there is from ClojureScript's perspective. I guess it's all just you end up in a browser kind of like back on what the source maps are for each of the code bases.
Yeah. Okay. I think there's also like just a lot of stuff that is going on in the JavaScript world where you like I'll read it in a blog post, like someone's like, "Oh, this is how you do it," and then I'm like, "But how would I do that in ClojureScript? Like, I don't know how to get that, like an import statement, like some magic happens importing a CSS or something. Like, why are you importing CSS in your JavaScript? It doesn't make sense, but they're doing it, and like Webpack does something unknown, no one understands, but it works. And you know, there's just all sorts of this stuff that
you have to be an
is
expert
happening.
at it.
But yeah, you have to I mean, I guess it's similar to like how Clojure can't do these functional interfaces, you know.
Well, we're getting a bit of chat.
Yeah. Okay.
That's saying, importing CSS is quite nice in JavaScript from DP Sutton.
What does it do? Like, how can you import a CSS in JavaScript? It imports it.
It was first exported, and now it's imported.
A JPEG.
What do you not get? It's imported.
Why are you importing a JPEG?
Because you want to.
All right, so tooling figures out how to make it all work. See, that is something that I think that we don't like in the Clojure community, where it's let's let the Webpack do it. We want to understand. All right, shall we move on?
I've never heard of Tailwind JIT. Oh, I'm so behind on everything that is happening in browsers.
It's impossible.
Oh no! It
and
keeps
just read blog posts. Why aren't you reading Hacker News all day?
One thing we should mention before we leave this subject, though, is that all the time on this chat, it's always a bit frustrating that everyone says something like, "Yeah, Shadow does that. Shadow does this. Shadow does that." So it feels like in the ClojureScript world, even we have actually got some kind of splintering occurring between what the ClojureScript defaults are and what the Shadow compiler is doing. So, I don't know how you feel about that, Mike. About what's the kind of are you guys like is everyone talking to each other? What's occurring, or is it like let innovation occur?
Yeah, I think Shadow is basically definitely innovating in areas, right? And I think over time, if those things are good, they would naturally and very slowly become part of ClojureScript proper, but it's it's definitely like very ClojureScript itself is very conservative in terms of taking on new things. I think Shadow can more readily just try new things, even if they're kind of experimental. I think that's good.
But yeah, I feel like its model is closer to how like Webpack assumes things work, which is just kind of like, let's just concatenate all this JavaScript together. Whereas the Google Clojure compiler tries to understand the modules in a certain way, and sometimes those assumptions that it makes are not the same as the way people wrote their npm modules. Right? Is that the difference there? That like the standard ClojureScript compiler is trying to run everything through the Google Clojure module system.
Yeah. So part of the problem I have is I've never done web development, and I've never mixed in with this npm world, or I've always used ClojureScript as a way to produce this assembly language that's called JavaScript to like do what I wanted to do, to run little mobile apps and whatnot. So I live off in my own little curmudgeon world, and I'm like, whatever, you guys. I've never dealt with like Webpack. What the hell is web? I don't even know what the web is. I've never targeted it, So like, I'm sure there's other developers out there who have very strong opinions on how this stuff interacts with all this stuff. But I have never, in all my use of ClojureScript, it's always been outside of the web. I mean, so you can't really look to me to have opinions on this stuff.
I think the tooling.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the tooling around JavaScript is very much even more than anything else is a state of churn. You have like npm that didn't used to deal with the browser, now deals with the browser. Then Yarman, and then you had Yarn from Facebook, which was a complete rewrite of npm. So there's a lot of competitive tooling out there that, we just don't really care about. But like you say, Mike, someone cares about it. Someone thinks one thing is better
there's a
than
lot of
the
people who
other.
care a lot about this stuff. Yeah.
So, Mike,
Tends
you're
not
with
to be
me
me.
on no more browsers. We just get rid of browsers.
That would be fine.
I mean, I would be happy with that.
No one needs to look at the internet. There's nothing.
Yeah. Well, we're outside of a browser now, so screw it. Yeah.
Whoa, but isn't this just an Electron app? It's like browsers.
Oh man,
Oh.
it is. Isn't it?
All right, so let's move on to the other release. This one, I think,
Okay,
Mike,
yeah,
you've already
more
talked
interesting
about.
stuff.
This was from May. There is now a compiler pass
Did I talk
that
about
does
this?
an optimization of and or. Maybe I seem to remember this.
This subject's probably come up.
We have met since this came out.
So the way I think about this is the and macros in ClojureScript previously would basically end up emitting JS star special forms that ultimately cause JavaScript to be emitted that uses the ampersand and the pipe JavaScript operators for and or. So effectively, the goal there with that stuff is to emit very efficient JavaScript when it can. In cases where the arguments that you're passing to those macros are like booleans or other compatible things. The problem with that, though, so it actually works. These things, if you were to macro expand an and form in ClojureScript, you would see that you get these JS star things that ultimately like spit out JavaScript. The problem is those are special forms that aren't known to core async. So what would happen is if you were using and or inside of a Go block effectively, core async would not understand what JS star means, and it would kind of take its liberties with pulling things out of those special forms, and kind of like the special form would lose its ability to do what it was trying to do, and you would end up with you would lose your short circuiting and stuff like that. So the solution that's in this
it would have a function barrier or something.
It would just lift things out of the JS star special form and let them, and basically evaluate things that would not have, how if is a special form and it won't evaluate. JS star is kind of another special form that wouldn't evaluate some of its arguments, but core async didn't know this, and it would pull things out and they would be evaluated, and things that might have side effects, you would start seeing them happening and stuff like that. So the solution was to stop doing that, make the macros simpler, basically make the macros look like the macros that are in Clojure. Just, I think they expand to let form, straightforward stuff. And then the magic happens at the other end of the compiler on the output side of it. I can't even remember how David did that. He's the one who wrote this. To me, the end effect was that the macros are now
So
simpler.
the macros have changed?
The macros have reverted to look a lot like, or they're very simple now. They look like Clojure's and or macros. They might be identical.
So they're
to
just
them
like ifs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If A, then A, and otherwise B.
Yeah.
But then also there's a compiler pass that if the compiler knows the types and the types are booleans,
Then it
it's
can
just
convert
going
it
to
back
insert
into
an ampersand.
Yeah, that's where that part's done. Yeah. So the end effect for you is that you can safely use and or inside of Go blocks effectively. That's the biggest thing that this fixes from,
Wow.
like a superficial.
That's crazy that it's been... It's
5
been
years?
that long since...
Yeah.
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 Wow.
And
Okay.
it's been so long that sometimes I'll forget and go back and use and or inside of a Go block, and I'm like, what the hell's wrong? What's it doing? Like, oh yeah, it's that thing. Well, now this has been fixed.
Right, because there have always been some macros that have been not recommended inside of a Go block, because they like, for instance, they compile to functions or something, and then you have that function barrier inside of a Go block.
Yeah, those limitations.
Like a for comprehension, you're not supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you would think, I can put, what's it called? The less than bang or those
Okay.
kinds of things inside of the for, but you can't
Right.
because
yeah.
it's actually not inside of a Go block anymore.
And it's too hard to remember sometimes. You're writing code. You're
Yeah.
inside of a Go block.
A lot to remember.
Or you're refactoring and you put some code inside of a Go block that used to not be in there. And sometimes the solution is to take the stuff out and put it into a normal function. But this is one less thing to worry about. And and or should work properly there.
Folks, I actually have to run. I'm sorry. But continue on without me.
All right, cool.
See you.
Have a good
Bye.
day. All right.
See you.
So there's only a couple more features we could talk about in the compiler. Let's see. Okay, this is kind of cool. You can now write a macro near the top of your namespace that when you expand it would turn into a require statement. I don't know if that makes sense what I just said. So typically, like at the top of your namespace, you have like the require, like the ns form and the requires. You can right after that, you could have a macro that macro, when you expand it, turns into a require statement that would then require a namespace. And this you might say, so what? What's what's the big deal? What does this give you? Evidently, it could be used to more easily hook in testing facilities and test namespaces that depend on like the environment that you're in, like whether or not you're writing production, if you're targeting production code at the time or some testing thing at the time. So it's kind of like, sometimes you want to do this where you want to like conditionally require something, right? And it's very very static right now. Everything has to be like literally put in the NS form. This is now like, you can have a macro that expands during compilation out into the thing that it needs to be. And typically, like with testing, you might say, "Oh, I want this namespace to be this code at test time, and maybe something else at production time where it turns into stubs or something like that." And you would do that with like you would play tricks with the paths and whatnot. I think this is another way to just do that, like at a language level. Just say, here's it. And this is something you can do in Clojure. Clojure's pretty dynamic. You can do all this stuff in Clojure. So this is like one limited thing that gets Clojure script closer to Clojure. There might be other use cases for this, but that's now in the latest release.
That's exciting. Anything that gets it closer to parity is good.
Yeah, I mean, there's always like limits, right, on what you can do in Clojure script because of the way it compiles and whatnot. But this is like one small step or one thing that you can do that is pretty much like Clojure. There's another thing in here with contains that I was kind of surprised by. So the iAssociative interface has a method on it that lets you ask whether or not this collection contains the key that you're interested in. Up until just now, the contains core function was not using that interface to check. It would do it through, I think, if I remember right, it would just try a get and see like, is the thing in there, and if a nil comes out, then it's like, it doesn't contain it, and that's the way it's worked all this time, right? Which is it's kind of surprising to me. So now it's added direct support for that particular interface, the iAssociative interface, and it will call that if the thing that you pass to it implements iAssociative. And this evidently came up. Someone was trying to do a custom type that had implemented iAssociative, and it just this was kind of needed to make it work. And it sounds like the right thing to do. It was surprising to me that all this time it's been just using get and working fine that way.
Yeah, I mean, if this is built in, does it make the when you don't have the special case where you need it, does it make it faster? Contains faster than using get?
I was wondering the same thing, and I don't think I did any performance tests to see, but I would imagine it could be. It's like, hey, if it knows that this it's like maybe a faster path to ask.
What's contains keep doing?
Oh, so like if you implement your own, like let's say you implemented your own collection class or your own data structure, it's up to you to implement whatever contains key is, for that would know like your data structure, your custom thing that you wrote.
But
So-
this is using contains key for the default map, right?
So the default map type would be iAssociative in ClojureScript.
Yeah.
So it would now actually call the contains key method
Right.
which might be faster than calling get.
I'm wondering, what's it doing? Like, wouldn't it
Oh.
be funny if it was just calling get?
No, that would be funny. Yeah,
Like,
it all has to bottom out in the same somehow. Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe it's faster. Maybe it just looks inside of its tree and says, "Oh yeah, this key is in there," but I'm not going to get the thing out of there. I could just tell you that it's in there somewhere. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it has a side index or something. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the main features. There's let's see. Yep, that's roughly it. So these latest releases are actually pretty small. They're like small, not huge news kind of things, but they're some incremental improvements. I think the and or thing to me is the biggest one, because it's always like you're writing Go code and you're like, damn it, I wrote an and or an or inside there. I had a coworker who was like, "What? You can't do that?" Like, yeah, sorry, this bug's been around for years.
Yeah, like it's been around a long, long time, and it's confusing.
Yes, yeah.
It's exciting.
One less rule to remember.
All right, well, I'm going to drop off. I have to prepare for a meeting that I just wrote the agenda for, so I've got to get ready for that.
All right.
Maybe next time we'll do some REPL to all of our fans. REPL's coming.
REPL next time, yeah. All right, I think we might as well drop since it's just going to be me and you. Mike.
Yeah, me and you staring at each other, right?
5 minutes still, anyway.
We're pretty much done a whole hour's worth anyway. Yeah.
Let's go Rayify some code.
Rayify, yeah. All right.
Thank you very much to the people who are watching live. It's really nice, and nice to see some familiar faces on the chat there. So we'll give some call-outs next time. But thank you very much, everyone who's watching, and thanks for all the questions and the comments. That's made it a lot better.
And we have our audience back.
Yeah, it's nice.
Woo.
Woo. I miss the YouTube chat. I miss it so much.
Yeah, so this is good. We're good again.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.
All right, later on.
Bye.
Hasta.